The United States has paused a shipment of bombs to Israel amid rising U.S. concerns the weapons could be used for an incursion into Rafah. U.S. officials say they believe a revised Hamas ceasefire proposal could break the impasse at negotiations aimed at halting the fighting. The negotiations resumed in Cairo today. Meantime, the Israeli military releasing this new video from Rafah. The vital crossing into Gaza remains closed after it was seized by Israel Tuesday. Israel has threatened to conduct a major assault on Rafah to defeat thousands of Hamas fighters it claims are holed up in the southern Gaza city. With me now to discuss is Michael Lynk. He's a professor emeritus of law at Western University and former United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. Good morning, and thank you so much for being with us. Let's begin by talking about the ceasefire. It's really hanging in the balance right now, and many are questioning whether or not Netanyahu is serious about pausing the fighting and letting the hostages go. What's your assessment of where things stand right now?
Well, I think Benjamin Netanyahu is in the middle of an incredibly tight vice. He's got international pressure, including even the Americans, who don't want to see an operation in Rafah. The Americans have said over the past several weeks that they would not support an Israeli invasion of Rafah, which is where the bulk of the Palestinian population in Gaza are huddling, unless there was a viable plan for ensuring their safety. And the Americans now seem to be saying they don't believe that such a plan could even be possible for this. On the other side of the vice is his own internal pressure. He has strong support from the Israeli public for continuing the war in Gaza. He has far right-wing members of his governing coalition and his war cabinet who want to see the war to continue. It appears that if he decided to accept a full ceasefire, that his coalition government would collapse. He then would lose power. He would then face the three different criminal charges for corruption that are awaiting him in the Israeli courts. So all of this means a decisive moment of decision-making for Benjamin Netanyahu.
And now the U.S. pausing a shipment to Israel. What message is the United States, is the White House sending to Netanyahu right now?
Well, given the extraordinary amount of both diplomatic and military support and political support that the United States has given to Israel over the past 7 months of this war, the fact that the Americans are finally using some diplomatic leverage with Israel by purportedly delaying the delivery of both precision-guided units for bombs as well as some large-scale bombs that it fears Israel would be using in Rafah is meant to send the signal that they're very displeased with Israel's decision, Benjamin Netanyahu's decision, to want to apparently launch a full-scale invasion of Rafah. Virtually every world leader, including the United Nations Secretary General, including our own foreign minister in Canada, have said that it would be a grave mistake or a catastrophic humanitarian decision to move into Rafah now. And the Americans, I think, are falling behind that public opinion, but finally catching up.
And is the pause in sending that shipment meaningful, do you think, to the war overall, to the battle overall? Or do you think that it is mostly symbolic, Michael?
Oh, a very good question. I think it's probably meant for the Americans to be able to show to the rising public opinion within the United States, which has shown displeasure with the way in which Israel has conducted the war and American full-scale support for the war. I think it's meant to appease or answer criticism coming from the parts of the Democratic Party and parts of public opinion. But it also does send a signal to Israel as well that there are red lines with respect to American support. Unfortunately, in the Middle East, when it comes to the Israeli-American relationship, red lines have a tendency sometimes to bleed into pink lines. And we'll see how long the Americans will keep with this decision to pause the weapons shipments.
I want to tap into your experience with the UN. We have heard from the UN Secretary General a number of times, including this week, speaking out, condemning any incursion into Rafah. This must just be making heads explode at the UN when we see even what they call limited operations in Rafah.
Yes, look, the UN has two primary, I guess, roles in this particular conflict. One is political, is trying to manage this conflict, particularly at the level of the Security Council. But the other is humanitarian. I mean, it's the United Nations which organizes and delivers humanitarian aid to the 2.3 million Palestinians living in Gaza, which has been an incredibly complicated exercise over the past 7 months. We have reports from UN humanitarian officials that there's only 1 to 4 days of humanitarian supplies left in the south of Gaza for the 1.6 or 1.7 million Palestinians who are huddled there. The main crossing point for getting that humanitarian aid from Egypt into Gaza is the Rafah crossing, which is now controlled by Israel, and which has stopped all humanitarian aid flowing into there. So all of these various UN agencies which deal with humanitarian issues in Gaza are saying, as bad as the situation has become over 7 months, this is the worst they have seen it.
This is the worst they've seen it. Is there anything more the UN could be doing?
Well, the UN is a strange creature. It's got both an outward-facing, I guess, image with respect to delivering humanitarian aid wherever there are problems in the world, but is also a political body as well that's controlled in part by the 5 permanent members. And the United States has shown, as one of the 5 permanent members sitting on the Security Council, that it's willing to use its veto both to block any moves by the rest of the world for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and even when it's allowed a ceasefire resolution to go through, as it did at the end of March, it did not insist that Israel obey that resolution, and said that the resolution was non-binding. So the United States has a pivotal role within the United Nations as to how this war winds up getting conducted and what the UN response is.
Professor Emeritus of Law at Western University, Michael Lynk, also a former United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. Really appreciate your time and our conversation this morning.